So I went to a charter school. It was a high school for fine arts. I had a lot of artistic friends. A lot of them actually moved on to be very successful musicians, chefs, and visual artists. My good friend Ben was one of the best visual artists at my school. One night I had a really creepy dream. In this dream, I was stalked by what looked like to be an old lady. But when I approached her, it turned out to be a bald old man, very pale, with no eyebrows. He was wearing an old lady sun hat. His eyes were sunken in and wide open. Really creepy. Well, my friend Ben was very good at facial composites. I asked him to draw this person for me as I described him. He did. And when I ever saw the drawing, I thought two things. Number one, Ben, my friend, you are going places. Number two, that's the fucking guy. Perfect. It was so crazy to see the person drawn out. I was amazed and creeped out at the same time. It doesn't end here, though. The next day, I was running some errands with my mom. We were driving through a very isolated area, a long road with only a junkyard and a gas station that's only for police officers to fill up their cruisers. Needless to say, you rarely see people walking around in this area, as there aren't even any sidewalks. We were taking a right turn off the road and saw somebody walking with their back to us. The clothing looked pretty familiar, and as we passed, my mother and I both looked out of curiosity. Turning our heads almost completely around, we caught a glimpse of this person's face. It was the guy. It was the guy from my dream. It was the guy from the sketch. My mom had seen the sketch too and immediately recognized him. We both looked at each other in absolute horror. We both said, "It's the guy." My mom is very skeptical of everything. I feel like even now sometimes when I tell her something crazy, she reacts like she doesn't believe me. I always have to prove things. Strange, I know. But I'm just glad my mom was there, because if I had been by myself, she wouldn't have believed me, and I probably wouldn't have believed my own eyes. He just stared. He looked right into our eyes, like into our souls. I wish I still had the sketch, but it was in this steel box that I had, along with photos and concert tickets that an ex of mine ended up keeping or throwing away on me. My friend Jay. I was in 6th grade when this happened. It was lunch and I was sitting with my friends. You know how there was that one disturbing psycho kid in your school? Well, that kid in my school was Jay. I was always the confident one out of my few other friends. Jay was the average future psycho, catching small animals or bugs and torturing them. One time he caught a squirrel and slowly ripped his limbs off. Well, this particular day, Jay had a tantrum and had to go to the office. When lunch was over, we headed back to class. Our teacher wasn't there. We waited between 10 and 15 minutes until we knew something was wrong. We finally found a staff member who looked shaken. My girlfriend, my best friend, and I asked what was happening. He said, just a little altercation downstairs. I finally ended up getting the full story out of him. He said the following. So Jay had a little tantrum, as you know, and was put in the principal's office. As the principal was escorting Jay back to class, Jay grabbed a pocket knife out of his pocket and stabbed the principal in his left hip, then ran. This happened when the janitor was using a screwdriver to check a vent out. He noticed the wounded principal and saw Jay fleeing. He tried to grab him while having the screwdriver still in his hand. Jay jumped on him, took the screwdriver from his hand, and brutally started beating him with the screwdriver until he was out cold with a huge gash and blood coming from his head. This gained attention from all the teachers and staff downstairs. My teacher was there at the time eating lunch with the 2nd grade teacher, She grabbed Jay and held him down while the staff and teachers called 911. Then lunch ended. Thank God we weren't there. Memories that need to decay. Many spooky encounters have happened to me in my childhood/adolescence, but there's only very few that I hang on to instead of shrugging them off and erasing them from my mind altogether. The story I'm about to tell you is long due to a chain of events, and forgive me if the story gets a little stressed out more than it needs to be through intricate detail. So the story starts back 8 years ago. I was fairly young, and I lived in a trailer park between two towns in eastern Iowa. Each town was about 5 miles out, and there wasn't much to them at the time. The trailer park was pretty desolate. It was consumed by fields of corn and timber. Back then it wasn't hard for me and my childhood friend Brock, who I'm still in contact with today, to stay occupied. Cap guns and lightsaber battles were part of our daily agenda. It was nice and simple. However, things started to spiral a bit, and I'm still trying to come to grips with them today. It was a cloudy with musky overhang summer day. Me and my friend had been doing our normal ritual of pretending to fight off Sith overlords, until one of us, and I'm not sure exactly who had the bright idea to bring the game into the cornfield. Looking back in retrospect, it's one of the most foolish mistakes we could have made. Our game shifted to the cornfield, and it was really cool until about 10 minutes in. We got so into the game that at some point we had split up. At first, this wasn't a bad idea, but things turned grim quickly. After another 10 minutes or so, my friend and I regrouped back in the cornfield, and what we saw still haunts me to this day. About 15 yards away was a distinguishable figure moving towards us. It was clearly a man, and he was roughly 6 feet tall. The man was looking straight at me. I remember his face and appearance clearly. He was wearing torn-up jeans, a white shirt with sweat stains. His face was beaten up with scars and a slight purple tint to his lips. We were frozen in shock. He moved towards us, speeding up rapidly. He approached faster, accelerating towards us. I could see the malicious intentions in his eyes. I was frozen for 10 to 15 seconds before I realized my friend had already booked it out of there. We ran for 5 minutes straight, not even looking behind us. We ended up making it out of the cornfield, regrouped once again, and made to safety as grandmothers. We made a pact to not tell either of our grandparents. However, it doesn't end there. A week later, things became more odd. Daily occurrences would happen. My grandfather would leave for work every morning around 7 a.m., sharp. But he would always find random trinkets and surprises on our porch each day. However, they were never the same. To give an idea of what some of the items were, what I recall was a severed doll head, some notes with gibberish written on them, paper bags of human feces, and a pair of muddy shoes. It was midsummer now, and the collection of random items had come to a halt. I wish to say it was all over, but it wasn't. One night I had been falling asleep in my bed when I heard a soft knock on my window. Keep in mind that I lived directly across the street from the cornfield where my friend and I had our first encounter. I hadn't been frightened by the knock, as I figured it was just Brock wanting me to sneak out with him just to fuck around. I peeked out my blinds. I was wrong. Across the street I saw the familiar silhouette dimly lit by the streetlights. His arms raised up, waving at me. I could see his yellow, crooked smile. I closed my blinds, rushed back to my grandparents' room, scared shitless, and told them what happened, and had told them about the first encounter with my friend. They immediately dialed the police. They showed up very quick and comforted me. It only gets worse from there. Another week or so later comes the final encounter. My friend and I were not allowed to go anywhere alone. We either had to escort each other or be escorted by an adult. On the night of the last encounter, we were at my friend's house in the yard tossing the football. Daylight was just dwindling down and fading into the night. My friend and I were about 20 feet away just playing catch when I threw the ball past him and he had gone to retrieve it. As he went back to go get it, I noticed his attention shifted towards the alley which led to his shed door. His face grew pale as he walked towards me trying to play it off. He was obviously scared. He shoved me in the door and alerted his grandmother. He said, "He's in the shed! He's in the shed! He has a knife! Call the police!" His grandmother didn't take a second thought and dialed immediately. The police showed up and had to escort the man out of the shed. It turns out he had been following my friend and I around since the first encounter and had been taking shelter in their shed since it had never been locked. We both moved away from that neighborhood since and never spoke a word of it again.